Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a classic,
Okay.
Mortimer J. Adler's Aristotle For Everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Aristotle can be a little bit intimidating to some, I think, right?
Yeah, it can be a tough read.
But Adler's book really aims to make those intricate philosophical ideas
Right.
surprisingly relatable. And he does it through this lens of something we all share, this idea of common sense.
I think that's one of the things that struck me most when I first read this book is,
Yeah.
Adler really emphasizes that you don't need a PhD to grasp Aristotle. He insists that we all already possess the basic building blocks for understanding.
Mhm.
It's about connecting those everyday experiences to these grand philosophical concepts.
So it's less about deciphering cryptic texts and more about recognizing these universal truths we kind of already know.
Exactly. And to kind of illustrate this point, Adler brilliantly introduces us to this concept
Sure.
of three dimensions of human activity: making, doing, and knowing.
Okay, I like it.
And he uses these vivid examples, like the shoemaker, the morally upright individual, and the scientist, to represent each dimension.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
Okay, so let's start with the shoemaker. They embody this act of making.
Yeah.
They transform raw materials, leather in this case, into something new and functional as shoe. This is the essence of productive thinking.
Got it. So it's about taking something potential and making it actual. What about the doing dimension?
That's where the morally acting individual comes in. They navigate the complexities of life-making choices and ultimately aiming to live well. Think practical thinking here,
Right.
weighing consequences, choosing actions, and ultimately striving for that good life Aristotle talks about.
And lastly, we have the scientist, always seeking to understand the world around them. That would be the knowing dimension.
Precisely, and that's where we see theoretical thinking come into play. It's all about observing, analyzing, and seeking those fundamental truths about existence.
It's like these three dimensions encompass the core of what it means to be human.
Right.
Does Adler then use this framework
He does.
to guide us through Aristotle's ideas?
He does, and we're going to follow that same path in this deep dive, beginning with the act of making.
Sounds good. Now, where does Aristotle himself start with this idea of making?
One of the most fundamental distinctions he makes
Yep.
is between the artificial and the natural. And Adler illuminates this with some really thought-provoking scenarios.
Oh, well, give me an example.
Okay, so imagine a forest fire. One ignited by lightning, a natural event. The other sparked by a carelessly tossed cigarette, an artificial happening.
So even though both result in a forest fire, what separates them is human intention.
Right.
One is a force of nature, the other a consequence of human action,
Yeah.
even if it's unintended.
You got it. The presence of human purpose is key. Another great example is this contrast between building a fire for cooking, a deliberate act with a desired outcome,
Right.
and a fire that starts accidentally.
So there's a difference between an artificial happening, like the accidental fire,
Mm-hmm.
and an artificial product, the carefully built cooking fire. I'm starting to see the distinction here.
And just to drive this point home even further, Adler uses a simple image. Cutting down trees,
Okay.
one felled by lightning, a natural event, versus one brought down by lumberjack tools. A distinctly artificial event.
Okay, so the involvement of human intention and purpose seems to be the defining factor in distinguishing between artificial and natural. Where does Aristotle go from there?
Well, these examples lead us to one of the cornerstones of Aristotle's philosophy, the four causes of change.
Ooh, four causes.
Yes,
That sounds a bit heavy.
it can be.
Does Adler make those easier to digest?
He does, absolutely. And what's so amazing is that understanding these four causes isn't just about grasping Aristotle. It's about understanding how we, even today, make sense of the world around us.
All right, everybody, walk me through these four causes.
Okay, so let's use a modern example. Designing a smartphone. The material cause is pretty straightforward. It's the glass, the metal, the silicon that make up the device.
Okay.
It's the what of the thing. The efficient cause is a bit more nuanced. It's the engineers, the designers, the factory workers who bring about the phone's existence. The who behind the creation.
Okay, so material is the physical stuff,
Mm,
and efficient is the who that creates it.
right.
What about the other two?
Okay, so the formal cause is a little more abstract. It's the design, the blueprint,
Okay.
the software code that defines what makes that collection of materials a smartphone. It's not just the shape or arrangement,
Right. Yeah.
but that essential smartphone-ness.
I see. It's like that essence that defines the object's category. It's identity.
Exactly.
What about the final cause?
The final cause is the why. Why create a smartphone? communication, entertainment, connection. These are the intended outcomes, the purpose driving its creation.
So the 4 causes, the what, the who, the essence, and the why. These apply to all change, not just smartphones, but everything around us.
Think about a tennis match.
Okay.
The racket hitting the ball, that's the efficient cause. The ball's movement across the court, that's the formal cause. And the point scored, that's the final cause. These 4 causes are a framework for analyzing practically anything.
This is fascinating. But it makes me wonder, how do we apply final cause to natural processes like, say, a tree growing? Does nature have a purpose in mind?
Now that's the million-dollar question, and one that leads us into some really deep philosophical debates.
All right, listeners, we're just scratching the surface of Aristotle for everybody.
Yeah.
And already I'm seeing the world a little bit differently. Stick with us, because we'll be back to dive deeper into Aristotle's ideas in just a bit.
Welcome back.
Last time
we left off with that thought-provoking question. Does nature have a purpose? And that's where this concept of forms comes into play, which I think is one of the trickier ones to grasp in Aristotle. You know, it's easy to kind of get hung up on the idea that it's just about the shape of something.
Right.
But Adler gives this great example to kind of clarify this idea. He uses the example of shoeness.
Right, I remember that. He talked about how shoeness is what makes all types of shoes, from sandals to sneakers to stilettos, belong to that category of shoe.
Right.
It's not about their style or the material, but that essential quality that makes them Welsh shoes.
Exactly. And that example, I think, really cuts to the core of how our minds work. You know, we can grasp these abstract forms, these essences, and see beyond the physical details to understand the underlying concept of a category. It's how we organize and make sense of the world around us, whether we're talking about, you know, plants and animals, or even abstract ideas like justice and beauty.
So it's like these forms are kind of like mental blueprints that help us categorize and understand everything. But how do those forms relate to change, to things coming into being and passing away? I know Aristotle makes this distinction between natural and artificial processes here.
That's where it gets really interesting. Let's contrast making a chair, an artificial process, with the birth and death of a rabbit. A natural process. When building a chair, we take raw material like wood, and we impose that form of chairness onto it.
Okay.
The rabbit, however, comes into being through a natural process, guided by its inherent form, what we might call today its genetic code.
Hold on, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So both the chair and the rabbit are informed matter, but through different processes.
Think of it this way. The chair's form is imposed externally by the human maker, while the rabbit's form is internal, driving its development from within. But what happens when these things change or cease to be? Let's start with the chair. Imagine taking it apart. You break it down to its basic components. Wood, screws, glue. But the wood still exists. Right? You could even use those same pieces to build something else, say a table.
So the matter persists.
All right.
Even though the form changes.
Right.
But what about the rabbit when it dies? Where does its form go?
Well, this is where Aristotle's idea of conservation of matter comes in. And it's a concept that really aligns with modern science. The rabbit, like all living things, is composed of matter. When it dies, that matter breaks down, decomposes.
Right.
But it doesn't just vanish. It transforms, becomes nutrients in the soil. Maybe even nourishes new life.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah.
Even in death, there's this continuation, this transformation of matter. But what about the mind's role in all of this? We've talked about it as a source of ideas. But how does it fit into understanding these natural processes?
Well, for Aristotle, the human mind is this incredible force, not only in creation, but also in comprehension. It uses productive ideas, know-how, and tools to shape the world around us. But it also has this amazing capacity to extract forms from the world, to create those mental blueprints that help us understand all sorts of things.
So it's like our minds are reflecting the forms of the world, allowing us to understand them. It makes me think of, you know, how we learn, how we develop those mental categories through experience. We observe, interact, and our minds start building these understandings. But where does this pursuit of knowledge lead us? What's the ultimate goal, according to Aristotle?
Well, this is where we move from the realm of making to the realm of doing, of living well. For Aristotle, true happiness isn't about fleeting pleasure or accumulating possessions, but about living a fulfilling life, achieved through right actions and choices. It's about striving for those real goods that are truly beneficial for human flourishing. things like health, knowledge, and virtue.
So it's less about having
Okay.
and more about being,
Yeah.
cultivating those qualities that contribute to a genuinely good life. But how do we even know what those real goods are?
Well, Aristotle believed that our natural needs kind of point us in the right direction. We all need basics like food, shelter, and companionship for survival.
Right.
But we also have these uniquely human needs for knowledge, connection, and purpose. Fulfilling these needs in the right way is what leads to true happiness.
That makes a lot of sense. If we're constantly chasing things that don't genuinely fulfill us, we'll never achieve that deeper sense of happiness. But it also seems incredibly challenging. How do we consistently make those right choices? Especially when faced with temptation or hardship.
Well, Aristotle would say that moral virtue is essential here. Virtues like temperance and courage equip us to make the right decisions, even when things get tough.
Okay, break that down for me. What does it mean to be temperate and courageous in the context of living a good life?
Well, temperance for Aristotle isn't about denying ourselves pleasure altogether,
Okay.
but about finding balance. It's about resisting overindulgence for the sake of pursuing higher goods and making choices that promote our well-being in the long run, even if it means foregoing immediate gratification.
So it's like that age-old struggle between short-term desires and long-term goals.
Yeah.
We all know we should eat healthy and exercise.
Right.
But the extra slice of cake and extra hour of sleep can be so tempting.
Exactly, and that's where courage comes in. It's not just about facing physical danger, but also about those inner challenges, those moments when we need to push ourselves to do what's right, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable.
So courage is that inner strength to overcome weakness and resist straying from that path of virtue. But these virtues, temperance and courage, they don't just appear overnight, do they?
You're absolutely right. Aristotle believed that developing moral virtue is all about cultivating good habits. It's like learning an instrument or mastering a skill. It takes practice, repetition, and conscious effort to make those virtuous choices until they become second nature.
So living a good life is a lifelong training program for our souls. We've got to work those virtue muscles, build those good habits until they become part of who we are.
Yeah.
But can we do this alone, or do we need help? Does Aristotle address that?
Well, Aristotle recognized that we're social creatures. We don't exist in isolation. The life we live, the choices we make, are deeply influenced by the people around us, by the society we're a part of. And this is where his political philosophy comes into play.
So he wasn't just concerned with individual happiness, but also with how we create a just and good society.
Precisely. Aristotle believed that living in a just society, governed for the common good, actually contributes to individual happiness.
Okay.
He saw the state as playing a key role in promoting the conditions for a good life, creating a framework where individuals could flourish.
That's fascinating. Our individual pursuits of happiness are intertwined with the well-being of the community as a whole.
Right.
We can't truly thrive in a society riddled with injustice and inequality.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really interesting aspect of Aristotle's thought, his concept of justice.
Okay, let's dive into that. I'm eager to hear how Aristotle approached this complex idea. So we've been talking about how our minds can grasp these abstract forms, but it makes me wonder, what exactly did Aristotle think the mind is?
That's a question that takes us into some fascinating territory. For Aristotle, the very fact that our minds can understand these immaterial forms, these abstract concepts that don't have a physical presence, suggests something profound about the mind's nature.
You're talking about the immateriality of the mind, how it's somehow separate from our physical bodies.
Exactly. Our senses, our bodies, they're all material things interacting with the physical world.
Right.
But our minds seem to operate on a different level. We can contemplate things like justice, infinity, or the concept of goodness, things that have no physical form.
So Aristotle believed that this ability to think abstractly points to the mind being something distinct from the physical body. But how did he explain that?
He contrasted our sensory experiences like seeing or hearing with the act of understanding, sensing and perceiving our physical processes. Light hits our eyes, sound waves vibrate our eardrums.
Right.
But understanding for Aristotle is non-physical. It's the mind grasping those immaterial forms.
It's like there's this whole other level of reality, the realm of forms, that our minds can access in a way our bodies can't. Our minds have a foot in both worlds, the material and immaterial.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads us to one of Aristotle's most mind-bending concepts, his idea of God.
Okay, here we go. This is where things get really metaphysical.
It does. But keep in mind that Aristotle's God is not the God of the Bible or other religious traditions. His understanding arises from his philosophical inquiries into the nature of the universe and what causes motion and change.
So how did Aristotle arrive at his concept of God?
Well, Aristotle believed the universe was eternal, meaning it had no beginning and no end, but he also believed everything in motion had to have a mover, a cause for that motion.
It's like that saying, everything that goes up must come down. Every action has to have a reaction.
Right. And so Aristotle reasoned that for the universe to be in perpetual motion, there must be a first cause, a source of all motion that itself is unchanging and eternal.
And that's God for Aristotle, this unmoved mover.
Yes. He called God the prime mover, this ultimate source of motion and change, a perfect immaterial being that sets the universe in motion, but remains outside of time and change itself.
It's a pretty radical concept, this unchanging God that's somehow responsible for everything happening in the universe.
It is. And it's interesting to consider how Aristotle's idea of God relates to modern science, while science has challenged the idea of an unmoved mover in the literal sense.
Right.
This idea of a fundamental force or principle that drives the universe still resonates.
It makes me think of things like the Big Bang or the laws of physics, these foundational principles that govern everything.
Yeah.
It's like we're still searching for that ultimate cause, even if our understanding of it has changed.
Exactly. And that's what's so captivating about studying philosophy. These ancient questions about reality, the mind, the universe, they're still relevant today. They encourage us to think critically, question our assumptions, and seek deeper understanding.
And that's precisely what Adler achieves in Aristotle For Everybody. He takes these complex foundational philosophical concepts and makes them accessible and relevant to our lives. This deep dive has honestly given me a whole new appreciation for Aristotle and the power of philosophy.
I couldn't agree more. It reminds us that common sense and profound philosophical insights aren't mutually exclusive. It's an invitation to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep striving for that good life Aristotle talked about.
And on that note, dear listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Mortimer J. Adler's Aristotle For Everybody. I cannot recommend this book enough. If you're at all curious about philosophy or grappling with some of life's big questions, this book is for you. It's a clear, engaging, and incredibly thought-provoking journey through the mind of one of history's greatest thinkers.
If you enjoyed this exploration even a little bit, I urge you to pick up a copy of Aristotle For Everybody and embark on your own journey of philosophical discovery. You might be surprised at just how relevant these ancient ideas are to our modern lives.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating subjects. We're here to guide you through the world of ideas, exploring everything from history and science to philosophy and the arts. Until next time, keep those minds curious and never stop learning.